Hello everybody and welcome to our whole school approach to emotional wellbeing team workshop on resilience. This workshop will last around an hour to an hour and a half, and there'll be a few opportunities for you to take part in some activities. We'd really encourage you to listen to these and to take part as if you were really there with us in the workshop. We really hope that you enjoy it and that you find it useful. Okay, so in front of you you've got our plan for the workshop today. So there's me, James and Charlotte who are going to go through it with you. So I'm going to start a little bit with what is resilience and why do we turn to resilience. James is then going to come in and talk a little bit about resilience in child development and resilience in the context of schools. And finally, Charlotte is going to talk about how we can better promote resilience in schools. So there's also a worksheet which we hope you might find useful. It's just got a few extra links in it and some of the key bits of information that we hope will supplement your understanding. So this should be accessible as a link in the video description. Okay, so just to start off with, we thought we'd take a couple of moments to have a little brainstorm. So in the live workshop, we used a tool called Mentimeter to collect the people's responses, but since you're at home, I would just encourage you to take a pencil and paper and to take a couple of minutes to jot down what the word resilience means to you, just in a few words. So if you pause this recording here, take a couple of minutes to write down those ideas and then press play again when you're ready to continue. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to note down a couple of words answering the question, what does the word resilience mean to you? So in front of you now you should be able to see the word cloud, which came up as we asked people in the live workshop to answer that question. So on a word cloud you can see that the biggest word is the one that came up the most often for people, so that's perseverance in this case, which came out as the most popular word, which I suppose would be quite similar to keeping going, which is there as well, and not giving up, never giving up. There's also a few words which come which seem to be like traits. So we've got flexibility there, we've got strength, there's also sustainability and sustainable. On the other hand, we've got a few words which maybe suggest a bit of a problem and solution sort of situation. So we've got striving for a solution, and we've got sticking at it, we've got a way out as well. But then on the other hand, we've got things like opportunity and toolkit. So these maybe are looking at it in a different way, perhaps having a different viewpoint to see the opportunity in a situation, or as resilience being seen as a bit of a toolkit of ways to cope with change. So I wonder if these words are different to your own or whether there's similarities. Feel free to write in the comments box if you want to share your ideas. But yeah, it's interesting for us to have a little think about what comes up for us when we look at the word before we now start delving into the research. So the next activity we have is a true or false task. It's another one that you can easily do yourself. Again, I'd suggest just getting out a pen and paper and taking a few minutes to decide whether you feel each statement is true or false. So here's your chance now to pause the video so you can do that. Just press play again when you're ready and we can talk through each answer. Hopefully you've had a moment now to note down whether you think each statement is true or false. So I'm just going to run through the answers. So for number 1, the statement resilience is a trait within a person. We, as the whole school approach, believe that to be false. So the evidence that we looked at pointed towards resilience being based on multiple characteristics which are really strongly affected by the systems around the person rather than a trait within. And the other problem that the idea of a resiliency trait has is that it carries the risk of blaming the victim who isn't showing resilience. Okay, moving on to number 2. So the statement, some people are resilient, others are not resilient at all. Now for this one, we also believe that to be false. That's because everyone has the capacity to be resilient, but we're all riding different storms and everyone's got different support systems around them. So for that reason, we as the whole school approach team feel that we wouldn't describe anyone as not resilient at all. So then for the last one, number 3, which says resilience of a person can change from day to day, even moment to moment, we would describe this one as true. And that's because resilience is a construct that can change over time, and different situational factors can change our levels of resilience even from moment to moment. So hopefully you've been able to learn a little from that true or false activity. And now we're just going to move on to a little bit more about what the research told us when we looked into what resilience is. There is no single agreed concept for resilience, but a few consistent themes did arise when we started our research. We thought we'd share a few slides on the themes and ideas around resilience that really connected for us as the whole school approach team. So Anne Maston is a researcher in the field of resilience. She describes resilience as ordinary magic. And she said, resilience does not come from rare and special qualities, but from the everyday magic of ordinary, normative human resources in the minds, brains and bodies of children, in their families and relationships, and in their communities. So what Anne Maston is really insinuating here is that resilience isn't a special trait, only reachable by a certain lucky few, but that it's achievable by normal people when given the right resources and systems to support them through the difficulties of life. And then looking at her second quote here, positive adaptation to adversity despite serious threats to adaptation or development. So although definitions for resilience can often centre on the speed and the extent to which someone bounces back, this assumes that the hardship is an experience or a setback rather than a permanent state of affairs. So when risks to well-being are chronic and they're ongoing, resilience might need to be thought about a bit differently. So this relates to the consideration that resilience is about positive adaptation. So it's dealing with adversity in a way that allows people to have a positive sense of self, good psychosocial functioning, and to be able to have effective problem-solving capacities. As the whole school approach team, we thought a little bit about how resilience is not about creating surprising success out of adversity, but rather it's about getting better at failing. That's why we've got this picture here of the chap continuing to aim his arrow at the target, even though you can see he's missed it a number of times. So resilience is about being able to pick yourself up and try again when you come across a situation that didn't work out the way you hoped that it would. So a useful quote, which we took from Brené Brown's book Daring Greatly, is resilience, not resistance. So there she's pointing out that we're not aiming to avoid adversity or to resist the difficult feelings or emotions that it brings, but rather in overcoming adversity, it's about learning from it, and it's about becoming stronger through those struggles. There's frequent lively debate about the meaning of the term, and particularly whether we can talk about resilience being something innate, so that's something we're born with or that's inside of us, or whether it's actually a bit more complicated than that. So we found that overly reductive and simplistic definitions, i.e. suggesting that it is innate, these risk responsibilizing the individual. So putting responsibility on a person and failing to acknowledge the important roles of family and of school and of the wider community in supporting people's resilience. So from our research, we feel that resilience is not simply an innate characteristic. And then we've got the spirals picture just there, which gives a little bit of a taste of what we might need to consider. So if it's not internal to the person, perhaps we need to start looking around the person or externally at those systems that they are within. So on this slide, we are showing two very important areas which we've heard repeated in different ways across the research. So the first one of these is that resilience can develop and change over time, and that it's best expressed on a continuum. People may have more or less resilience to draw on at any given time. So this means that resilience is not static, so it can change over years, months, weeks, days, or even hours, depending on one's circumstance. We considered that even within a really short period, it can be impacted. So, for example, one might be more resilient to an event after their morning cup of coffee rather than before. We might consider that a child may be less resilient during a period of difficulty, such as when his or her parents are going through a divorce. And when we think about child development, we might find that our children and young people are impacted by changing risk and protective factors at different ages and at different developmental stages. And then the second area is that resilience may be domain specific. So this means that a child might show competent functioning in one area of their life, for example, in their academic achievement, but then they may have deficits in another, such as their emotional functioning. This makes it really important to consider a person's level of resilience within multiple areas and domains over a reasonable period of time, and whether they're experiencing adversity or not, alongside their potential external and internal expressions of distress. So we can see here from this quote from Luther that some children might appear resilient in terms of their behaviours, but they may actually be experiencing a lot of internal distress that isn't clear to us from the outside. So over the years, we've steered more towards definitions that focus on external processes and mechanisms, and we're going to have a little look at how they've changed in our next slide. So the concept of resilience has changed massively over the last 50 years. It has shifted from something that we used to describe as invulnerability to being a developmental process that is not fixed or immutable and that depends on both individual and relational factors. So early definitions we can see here on the left of the timeline. These made note of invulnerable children, as we can hear in the 1974 quote. Resilient children are invulnerable children, those children who, despite genetic, psychological and environmental disadvantage, continue to adapt and perform competently. So if we move along a bit, by 1989, we can see that researchers were still describing children as appearing unscathed, despite their exposure to adversity. So Werner and Smith said, even through the most stressful experiences in the most terrible homes, some individuals appear to emerge unscathed and to develop a healthy, stable personality. Then a little bit more recently, as we reached 2006, we could see that researchers have come to acknowledge that there are no invulnerable children and that resilience is not static but may wax and wane over the life course. And then resilience moved from being considered a fixed personality trait to being a temporal process, sometimes referred to as positive adaptation. So Sacchetti in 2010 described it as a multiply determined developmental process that is not fixed or immutable. So the quote here says, "The attainment of positive adaptation in the face of significant adversity involves a developmental progression. New vulnerabilities and challenges and/or strengths and opportunities often emerge with changing circumstances over the life course. Resilience is not something an individual has, it is a multiply determined developmental process that is not fixed or immutable." So then moving on to quite recently, 2017, Sue Roffey considered that resilience is not always just about bouncing back from one difficult experience or setback. She noted that for many children and young people, risks to well-being are chronic and ongoing, so resilience may need to be thought about differently, considering both individual factors such as personal factors like intelligence, optimism, and a locus of control, as well as all the social or relational elements of being resilient. So including feeling that you belong, having high quality interactions, positive relationships, and good socio-emotional learning. So this is our understanding of resilience in 2021, but we should still consider that it may yet shift again as time goes on and as research into this area continues. So again, we've got another true or false activity, and I just want to take another moment now to allow you to grab your pencil and paper again and just pause the video so you can read through the statements and note down your answers. So I'll give you a moment to do that now before we go ahead and talk through the correct answers. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time then to note down your answers. So I'm just going to run through them. Number 4, the statement is talking too much about feelings makes people less resilient. This one is false. We say, on the contrary, talking about feelings can really help us to manage our difficult emotions in a healthier way. Number 5 is people who are resilient will be happy all the time. Now this statement again is false. Being resilient doesn't mean that you can completely resist pain or suffering. Instead, it means you're able to come out of it with the help of the community around you. Hence the next one, number 6, the statement which says people who are resilient are able to cope with change with the support of those around them. And we would say absolutely to this, because resilience is a process which not only involves the individual, but the whole community and the systems around them. And then the last one here is number 7, which says resilience is an innate quality that only some people have. Now this one is false, and that's because everyone can develop resilience and everyone has different levels of resilience. So it can alter depending on our circumstances and with time. Okay, so we wanted to just take a moment to consider, why are we asking about resilience? Why do we turn to resilience? And you might be wondering what brings us to think about these misconceptions around resilience, as we have done in so much detail. Well, if we believed that resilience was something that came from within, something innate, that it was a trait, then perhaps it would feel like resilience might be an easy answer, assuming that change will come from within that person who is struggling. But we know it doesn't come from within. Resilience is hugely impacted by our environment. And if we start off by trying to promote resilience in others, thinking it's concrete or thinking that it's something we can train people to do, then we might be setting ourselves up to fail. We know that resilience is not concrete, it changes over time and it changes depending on the circumstance. Therefore, we wanted to be really careful with the way we promoted resilience in this training to ensure we don't run the risk of promoting a sense of failure for anyone who doesn't seem to be being very resilient. And we wanted to consider how any interventions that we think about are going to be experienced by the community. So overall, we really hope that our message can be hopeful, because when we understand resilience to be transient and changeable, then we're not going to panic when somebody isn't feeling particularly resilient. For example, we know that we might feel more resilient after our morning cup of tea or coffee than before it. And in the same way, we can accept that ebb and flow of resilience for others in our school community. So now I'm just going to pass over to James, who's going to take us through resilience in child development and resilience in the context of schools.
Okay, so let's just spend a moment thinking of examples of a child or adult that you've known or you may have read about who has shown resilience by whatever characteristics you consider to be important. I want you to think about what made it possible for this individual to overcome that adversity, what was in their lives, who helped them, what kind of resources did they have available to them that helped them to overcome the challenges that they faced. And think about what made a difference for them. So what I'd like you to do is just pause this video for a moment and just think briefly about what those characteristics might be and answer those 3 questions that you can see on the screen in front of you. When we've done that, we'll look at a video by Anne Maston where she talks about some resilient children that she's come across in her professional career, which we'll include in a YouTube playlist for you to be able to access.